coming. Yes. Okay, shared in the Facebook chat and here. All right, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Good evening, comrades. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good evening, comrades, and those watching on YouTube. Tonight we'll be discussing chapter 2 of Hegel's Science of Logic once again. Last time we delved into the mysteries of determinate being up until the section on finitude. But before we get on with finitude, I think a little recapitulation is in order. My leadoff last time dealt with the discussion Hegel has in narrating determinate being in general, how determinate being is quality and how that quality has two accents, that of being and nothing, being reality and negation, and how something turns out to be a being within self, a manifold determinate being called something. Now, I've read the assignment through where I placed it on page 133, and I'm still processing it, but I feel like discussing it tonight won't mean much more than a book report at this point if we don't understand the inner manifold that is developed behind it. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight. So just to kind of recapitulate, being and nothing are two immediacies that have collapsed into one, called determinate being. Hegel talks about in the text, he talks about Aufhebung, which is what we would call sublation, or the dialectic, is a process of negation and preservation at one and the same time. It is self-impurification from within. Okay, there's no telos or goal to this process. It simply is what occurs through each shape's self-determining. Determinate being is being that is non-being. This is how Hegel puts it. It is determinacy that is, or quality. And quality is determinacy that is. And basically what it means is that there hasn't been any change. It's simply that determinate being in general has been sort of examined by itself in what it is. Being is qualitative, but it does not have qualities. We're not yet into the doctrine of the essence, however, where the categories can be said to have a being in another, so to speak. Quality has two accents logically, that of reality, or affirmative quality, and negation, which is quality with the accent on nothing. Kyle and I were just discussing this a little bit before everyone else came in, and it's really the case. This is the first time, and this is pretty crucial, this is the first time a difference is thought in the logic, okay? That of reality and negation. They don't vanish, but are persistent. Being and nothing are different from each other, but they also don't persist. They collapse on their own. They're less than unstable, one could say. Determinate being cannot consist in simply being real or negative, but must always involve being real and negative together, right? Both settled and differentiated together. And that sounds like a contradiction. It is. It is the self-movement of determinate being as such, and in general. he talks about the negation of the negation and the difference between the first negation of negation and the second, which is really the real one. He goes into this at some length, and Houlgate also talks about it in his book, The Opening of Hegel's Logic, trying to tease out the simple nothing that is negated as opposed to the negation that's negated, which is could be called the second movement or the first, depending on your point of view. We've seen that determinate being consists logically in sublated difference, or difference in self-relation. It preserves the moment of difference within its self-relation. Dasein, determinate being, can relate to itself only insofar as it preserves an internal difference between itself and itself. Okay. True determinate being must possess a differentiated logical interior and be what Hegel calls in sich sein, which is being within self. This is the first logical determination, something that is self-relating. Okay. So this provides us with the basis for the rest of the logic, and even up into nature and spirit. He always talks about how the different categories are self-relating. This is the first time that we come across the something is the first time that we come across a self-relating category of thought. Okay. And it's really the ground floor, and its shapes go on to determine, as sublated, the characteristics of all the categories that are to come, all the way up through absolute spirit, all the way at the top, right? Of the 3 times 3 times 3 pyramid, or however he's putting this together. Let's see here. Something, and moving on a little bit, something is constituted by its relation to itself, not by its relation to what it differs from. It cannot relate to something else until it itself is independently something and self-relating, if that makes any sense. Other is more explicitly relational and negative, as it isn't being, well, it is being something, but it's also being something and also not being something. The accent, again, is on the negative side with other, and so it has a set of characteristics that make it independent of something, while at the same time being at the same time a something as well. It's a little, okay, so something and its other are both something, and each is an other by virtue of not being what the other is. They are in fact the same, no distinction between them. So when I said that other is self-constitutive by itself, outside of the relation to the something we just talked about, the something we just left turns out to be an other to the something we're not talking about, and its structure is the same, being an other, right? So they both mutate at the same time. It's funny how this happens. So now we have two as opposed to just one, right? It's like the cell divided, right? Houlgate, for some strange reason in his commentary, uses this departure to talk about how, well, Houlgate doesn't, or Hegel doesn't really turn out to be much of a monist, given that these two things have cropped up. And I take some exception to that, because monism has to do with substance being a single substance, outside of which there can be no other, and what he means is being, of course. And that's a different discussion for later. I'll just finish up my quick recapitulation here. But it's sort of interesting that he puts it that way. Being other also consists in being self-relating determinacy. As I said, it stands apart from something and enjoys its own identity. And again, saying it again, something and other are separate spheres of being. One can almost say discrete, but nothing at this point is really discrete in and of itself. Being and nothing were thought of as discrete, and they collapsed in on themselves, as we saw before. For Hegel, to be something is to be an other, and to be other within oneself. To be other within oneself is to be other than oneself. This in turn means being other than the other one is. This gives rise to the process of becoming, and so becoming, right, has reemerged, sublated at the higher level on the spiral. Becoming other, or of othering oneself, is the process of change or alteration. Okay, so becoming has mutated as a process into change or alteration. Something then necessarily changes because logically it is otherness in itself, and as other must be endlessly other than itself. And so one could look back at Hegel's discussion about the plant, or people being born, growing and dying, and things like this. You're still the something, categorically speaking, but each moment passes and you are endlessly other than what you were the previous moment. What he talks about specifically in this section about change is the fact that the structure of reality at this point does not hang on the category of time. We are not in the philosophy of nature, okay? Time has not been determined yet, nor space, nor any of that stuff. At this point, logically and categorically, we can see that the process of change is not contingent on time, but rather the structure of reality at this abstract abstract point in our logical investigation turns out to reflect a structure of change in itself. Logically and categorically, I'm not sure how else to put that. It is an ahistorical statement to make that that the structure of reality previous to time could be not contingent on time. But again, this is a logical argument, not a historical one. And so you have to remember that we're talking about shapes of reality that turn out to be part of the whole, and the whole does turn out to be nature, which includes time. So in making the logical argument, you cannot make the argument contingent on a category that hasn't been derived yet, but at the same time, once we finally get to the whole, it will have turned out to be as well a part of it. And I'm not sure how to put that any better. Now, from here, we were supposed to talk about finitude through limitation and the ought. And like I said, I read it through, but I'm not sure I understand it all yet. And so I'm going to stop here and we can continue. Stack is open. Thank you so much. Are there any questions about what I just said about the structure? It's a manifold. Determinate. Holgate has so many good sections that sort of recapitulate, but really, determinate being starts out as a simple immediate unity of what consists of behind it logically, the being, nothing, and the becoming. But when you start looking at the determinate being, you find out that the truth of it includes being something, being other, having, not having, but being finitude itself, and so forth. And the self-relating determinacy is pretty key to the structure of the manifold. Think of a box and think of circuits inside that are each labeled, each one of these sort of things. You have being and nothing, and being is sort of hooked into vertically into reality, right? And reality is hooked into what was it? Sorry. Yeah, I lost it. Okay. Stack's open. For those in the YouTube space, it may seem like there are several awkward pauses in our classes. And really, this only reflects the fact that our group has been an open discussion forum for the most part throughout the Encyclopedia Logic, as opposed to a guided class and sort of a completely programmed space. So this is very much not a programmed space. This is a free-for-all. We could get into any kind of discussion that goes far away from the text or whatever we feel like talking about. So just so you know, but we'll keep trying to talk about the text as we go along. Thanks.
I guess I'll go ahead and go right quick. I think I mentioned, we both mentioned it before. It is interesting. We get past the other to being for another, and then there after that being in itself, it actually kind of, instead of kind of redescribing being and nothing in a higher, in an ever present going up, it almost feels like we step back, refocus on something we've already been present to. That just tells us more about and determination we just arrived already. And so definitely what we can see here is that just there is not necessarily a formulaic process that can be really be applied here in a sense, because it is going in, it seems to be going in unexpected directions sometimes, and it's logically doing so. And that's it.
Oh, and Doug, I'm really sorry about socks. I hope you got to visit a little bit today.
Yeah, I saw him and I'll see him tomorrow. So I haven't read closely. I've also been shifting stuff back and forth. I did read up to where we were supposed to, but honestly, I just haven't focused too much on it. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I've read just as much as you have, but sometimes, like when you're in the moment, and I know you felt this, you're like, oh wow, like all this stuff. After reviewing what I just did in the lead up, I almost can't remember what I read from finitude all the way through the ought. I mean, I'll look at it and it'll all look familiar, but what it all consists of, I won't say it's gone, but it's definitely, yeah. one thing, in dealing with something and other, Hegel starts to get into the borderline between the something and the other as the limit, and sort of defining this categorically, and tying it to finitude. In other words, something that comes to a stop. Can't remember exactly where it was, but Houlgate talks about how indeterminacy itself reemerges within the movement of determinate being in unexpected ways. Like on page 126, Hegel says, being for other is the indeterminate affirmative community of something with its other. In the limit, the non-being for other becomes prominent, the qualitative negation of the other, which is thereby kept apart from the something which is reflected into itself, and so on. And so, this idea of sort of an indeterminate quality to some of the movement before it comes into its truth, that's there. And talking about quality, it's not that determinate being has qualities. It's still the doctrine of being, and so none of these categories can have anything. They are quality, and quality as such has certain shapes. Well, it has two shapes according to Hegel: the positive and the negative, the affirmative and the negation. That reality, in other words, is a quality, as is negation, and negation again of itself. They sort of fold back on themselves into that manifold shape that is the full determinate being in its truth, before we move on to what is it, being for self? Yeah, being for self, which is it moves beyond self-relating. It goes into more of a gosh, I'm not even sure how to describe it categorically. Stack is open. Does anyone else come in? I saw JR might get on at some point, or he might just be watching. Who knows? Either way is fine. Okay, just so I hit finitude a little bit. I'm going to read this quote real quick because I honestly at this point, after all of the development, it really reads like poetry. So so he said, and this is page 129, about halfway down. He says, oh, hang on just a second. Okay, that's candy. So he says, the being of something is determinate. Something has a quality, and in it is not only determined, but limited. Its quality is its limit, and burdened with this remains, in the first place, an affirmative stable being. But the development of this negation, so that the opposition between its determinate being and the negation as its immanent limit is itself the being within self of the something, which is thus in its own self only a becoming, constitutes the finitude of something. Yeah. When we say of things that they are finite, we understand thereby that they are not only that they not only have a determinateness, that their quality is not only a reality and an intrinsic determination, that finite things are not merely limited. As such, they still have determinate being outside their limit. But that, on the contrary, non-being constitutes their nature and being. Finite things are, okay, but the relation to themselves is that they are negatively self-related, and in this very self-relation send themselves away beyond themselves, beyond their being. They are, but the truth of this being is their end. The finite not only alters like something in general, but it ceases to be. And its ceasing to be is not merely a possibility, so that it could be without ceasing to be, but the being as such of finite things is to have the germ of decease, death, as their being within self. The hour of their birth is the hour of their death. And so really he's describing the manifold within determinate being as a finite state of being and what that entails categorically. And that manifold category sort of colors everything in nature and spirit, at, you know, everything that's external and finite ends up being, you know, what it is, and in being what it is includes its own negation. So it's 9:32. I don't know if anyone has anything on that. Okay, everyone looks tired and sort of rough ridden. I get it.
Yeah.
So do you guys want to talk about something else or call it a night early? We can do either. It's fine.
I think I'm good to call it early. Doug? Jim?
I'm fine calling it early.
Okay. Does anyone have any feelings about maybe picking an earlier time? Or do you think tonight's just
It's not anything with this group. It's just stuff going on with me. You know, that's really why.
I've had a not great few days as of late. So yeah, it's just pure timing.
Yeah, getting rid of the caffeine is rough. Like,
You know, and that was the starting point.
like you said, yeah, sort of runs into everything. Okay, cool. Well, it was good to get a little bit of review in, sort of go over what we covered from last week's reading, and next week we can delve more into finitude through the ought. and hopefully run up to infinity if we can. Although, I mean, we don't have to. We'll just go at our own pace. So, comrades, you get some rest and have a nice night.
You too. Good night.